Bene.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to all of you. I'm glad to see many people, and welcome also to our remote guests. I think that we are here this evening moved by the desire to try to understand what does this strange title means. Well, at least apparently. Guardians of Life, the we within the I. First of all, allow me to greet you and also our guests, the guests that will help us better understand this topic. I will shortly greet them, and then we're going to get to know them better as long as we go on. I have here Father Vincent Nagle, Chaplain of the Maddalena Grassi Foundation, and he deals with patients in very serious condition. And then from remote, we have the friend who organized and structured the vast majority of this meeting, Elvira Parravicini, Director of the Neonatal Comfort Care Program, Associate Professor of Pediatrics, Columbia University Medical Center. And thanks to her and her contacts, we have two extremely important experts when it comes to palliative care and relation to patients. We have Professor Patrick Vinay, Professor Emeritus of Medicine at Montreal University. Thank you very much for being with us. And we have Cristina Benetti, Nurse Coordinator of the Jewish General Hospital of Montreal. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. And thanks to be there to say I all together and to try to do your best. I'd like to start introducing the topic very briefly. When it comes to all human expressions, including work and including the work that has to do with care of the sick and the people in need, there is a high level of responsibility. And this responsibility is possible only if there is the freedom and the courage to say I. This is something that we have heard and learned through many interesting conferences and sessions. And this I features two specific traits. First of all, this I is not alone, is working in a place with other people. Let's think about a team, a caring team, but also a team of patients. So the team of carers, is made of many profiles, and also the family is the object and the subject somehow of the care. So there is a whole, team that is part of such situations. So the carer team and the cared for team. But there is another trait to be considered when it comes to these caring places. The I can be deeply and profoundly touched and surprised. So that I can express feelings. So the I, in these cases, remains always extremely personal, and so there is always an individual vantage point, but it is always in relations with many yous. And so it's a very complex network of relations that I think today we're going to, get to know better through our guests. During the pandemic, that was an extreme situation, places of care have experienced an even more difficult context. And human beings are also complex beings. So on the one hand, people tried to guarantee dear ones and relatives the access to patients, so caregivers, voluntary workers, spiritual assistants, and physicians. They all try to do their best to guarantee the contact with the patients. And the underlying idea was that at the end of the day, with the relatives, but then on the other hand, there was the idea that with the relatives out of the ward, work can be performed better. So both attitudes are possible. The important thing is to try to understand who is your interlocutor and who you're dealing with, and also trying to understand the different points of view of the people involved. So this session is moderated by me and by Professor Elvira Parravicini, who was able, thanks to her over-the-pond contacts, to set up and organize this session, and so I give her the floor. Thank you very much, Elvira. Thank you, Marco, and thanks for helping me in setting up this session. Good evening, everybody. I am a neonatologist, and I have established a special care program for neonatal care, and I'm very pleased to introduce our first two speakers. First of all, a few words about the title of this session. We live and flourish within relationships since the very beginning of our life. The baby develops itself in total dependence from the mother. So newborns depend on their mummies, and when a newborn and a baby cries, if held by the lovely arms of the mother, calms down because it recognizes and hears the beating heart, the development also from a cognitive point of view of the babies depend on the relation from the parents and the mother. And then as soon as we grow up, we develop relations with friends, with acquaintances, with classmates, and with relatives. So we live within relationships. This is our human nature. And as Marco said, the pandemic forced people to isolation. And this has been particularly true and evident in the medical field. Mothers delivered alone because fathers were not allowed in the delivery room. Hospitalized patients missed the support of their family's visit. And worse, many people died alone. This isolation, by the way, also hit medical professionals. There was a high rate of depression, abandonment of the workplace, and sometimes there were also suicides. All this happened because for both patients and medical professionals, relationships are the source of support, even in dramatic circumstances. I'd like now to introduce the first speaker, and I'll quote Margaret Mead, an anthropologist. Mead said, the very first sign of civilization in ancient culture was the discovery of a broken bone that then sort of healed again. So a broken femur that healed means that somebody was healed and taken care of by somebody else. And I think that this is a very good introduction for these guardians of life, the we within the eye. We have been devastated and overwhelmed by the pandemic. Nurses, medical professionals, physicians did their best to treat their patients, and they put even their lives at risk. And so this profession, this whole sector, was also surprised by a real source of humanity. So many people decided to be there for the others, and they also helped others to unveil this human nature. We asked Cristina Benetti, a nurse, to share with us her experience. She lives in Montreal, Canada, since 2004, and she was the ward sister for 15 years at the Jewish General Hospital. And before that, she worked at the Ospedale Civico Cividale del Friuli and then in San Raffaele Hospital in Milan. In 2010, she also worked for AFSI in Haiti for a couple of months. So, Cristina, the floor is yours. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank Elvira for this nice and kind introduction, and I thank the organizers of the meeting for this kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you and to share what God has made possible for me in my life and what He does also in the life of other people. I'd like to start from March 15th, 2020. Can you hear me? Is everything fine with the connection? Yeah. So I start from March 15th, 2020. We received the first COVID positive patients. I remember that I talked to a colleague at the hospital, and we asked ourselves, what about here? What about Montreal? Will we have the same disaster as in Italy? And talking to him, I realized that thanks to my job, I would outline a new responsibility. I was faced with the new reality. I was called as a calling, looking like a vocation. Nobody could answer in my place. On top of that, I had to protect the people living with me. I perceived a sort of special preference. This experience is something that I got to know some years before. When I got the vocation, I am Memoris Domini, and I lived a unique experience of love in my life, and I wanted to donate myself completely, and I really wanted to express this preference I was privileged with. I remember that evening I told my living mates that I had to start an isolation because we were having the first COVID positive patients, and so I had to protect them. So I entered into my room and I burst into tears because I loved the people living with me so much. I was grateful for my job as a nurse, and that sacrifice was not a problem. Fortunately, I had my own bathroom, and it was in my room, and so for more than 2 months, I lived isolated. And then what happened in my hospital? In a few days, my hospital became a COVID center, and so COVID patient wards were set up, intensive care units filled up very quickly, and operating theaters were shut down because we needed more space. So we just had 4 for emergency cases, always concerning COVID patients. And all that happened in a very short time. Imagine the chaos and the confusion and the protocols that kept changing overnight. There was so much uncertainty, so much fear. Our nurses were transferred to the wards, and so they were assigned to the wards. So operating theater nurses are extremely specialized as far as surgery is concerned, because they assist surgeons during the surgeries, and so they had left direct patient assistance and care for a long time, so they had to be specifically trained before moving to the wards with COVID patients. And from the very beginning, I started perceiving some sort of discomfort, and in spite of the emergency situation and the good grounds for those decisions, I mean, there was this kind of, discomfort from these colleagues. And I would like to mention the title of our session, Guardians of Life, The Will Within the Eye, because I was understanding them. I knew well that maybe they felt alone, because you can accept and welcome the situation if you are an eye that feels accompanied by a we. I made that experience 18 years ago when I first arrived in Canada. I came here to Canada because a Canadian girl was beginning a pathway of total dedication to Jesus at Memories Domini. And I remember that moment. So Elena and Elena was a friend, we decided to share a home with her. And that was possible because there was a sort of abundance. Because inside me, I was already living that experience. So through the encounter with the movement, through the Memories Domini experience, and this house sharing experience. So I really wanted to spread this attraction to Jesus as much as possible. And I remember that my nurses had to perceive the belonging to a place. That's why I started having daily contacts. I was waiting for them in the changing rooms to ask them about their day. And I gave them updates about the operating theater activities. I was asking them if they needed anything. And so I wanted to make sure that they were developing this sense of belonging, the belonging to the team of the operating theater, so that they could then go back to the operating theater, because we needed their specialized skills and their training and their capabilities, because without them, we could not reopen the operating theaters. In particular, there was a team of nurses that was not able to stand the shock of these, professional transfer for different reasons, because they had their children home, they had husbands working on a smart working basis, panic attacks, the need to isolate, so they took time off from work. But I tried still, even with them, to keep a weekly contact, updating them about activities at the hospitals, the hospital data, telling them what we were doing. And I was trying to reassure them and say, do not feel guilty, because, they also felt guilty because there was such a need of nurses, but they could not respond to that call because of their psychological situation. It was pretty serious. And that was the first phase of the COVID crisis. Then there was a second phase when COVID entered the nursing homes for the elderly. So they were closed to relatives, and so these old people that were already very fragile and frail, they died. They died because of the lack of basic assistance, mostly, not just for COVID. So when it comes to our team, we needed to have more nurses and assign them there. And my boss was under pressure because he had to transfer some nurses. But at that point, we ran out of people, of colleagues. I remember during one meeting, I remember that we were trying to see who was available, and we were saying, oh, she's a single mother, we cannot send them over because if she gets sick, who is going to take care of her child? So and also the people who have old parents at home, or she has asthma, the other one is too weak, let's say. So we couldn't oblige them, we couldn't force the situation. And so I thought, well, I don't have any children and I'm already under isolation. So I make myself available. I can go, I said. And well, the others reacted strangely. And my boss said, so who is going to remain here? And then I said that I would work in the operating theater during the week, and over weekends I would go to nursing homes. And when I made myself available at that point, I remembered Massimiliano Kolbe, and it was like a friend, because I understood at that point in time that I could be available. I would adapt to reality, because at that time I was so filled with charity and attention that I could do that. I came back home, and in front of my door there was always a tray with what I loved the most, snacks and herbal teas. And I was always finding a ready meal on a lovely tray, always very, very full of the food I love the most. And I kneeled spontaneously because I was so grateful. So my eye could take risks, because I felt my eye within a we, because the people living with me were expressing their love to me, saying, we are with you, we support you, we are there with you. And so I felt embraced. And I'd like to share 2 anecdotes about my experience at the nursing home. The first day I went, I was a bit scared and intimidated, and I really didn't know, how to be. I asked Jesus, please surprise me and come to me. And I was looking for my colleague who had also been transferred there. So I look for my colleague, so a friendly face, and she saw me and said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I made myself available. And she said, oh, it's hard here. I'm so scared. Everybody's dying here. This is hell. I feel to infect my family, she said. So that was the situation in nursing homes. And I answered, well, actually, I'm here to work with you. Together, we're going to be stronger to help each other. And my intention was to deliver basic assistance, so hygiene of patients, and feeding them, and if they were thirsty, to give them drinks. And I remember 2 episodes distinctively. I had came across an old man who was COVID positive. It was at the end of his life. And it was always alone in that room. Nobody was entering the room, because unless you need to be fed or you're thirsty, nobody gets in. So I entered the room. I spent some time with him. I washed his mouth. I refreshed him, and I talked to him. And the nurse asked me, does he talk? And I replied, no. And she said, oh, he's very sick, he's in serious condition. And I said, oh, yes, I know, that's why I'm here. The next day, this man was not there any longer, but I remember that I had spent nice moments with him. We had a good time together, even if it was a short time. Another anecdote is the following. And on the door of each patient's room, there was the picture and the name, and I noticed that it was an Italian woman. So I was passing by, and so I said, buongiorno signora, good morning, madam. And She had had a stroke, a very hard one. She was paralyzed. She had a palsy and she couldn't speak any longer. And but I could see a light in her eyes when I talked to her. And that was a nice moment too. And before going home one day, I came round, and I said to her, would you like to say a prayer? And so I started to say Ave Maria in Italian, and she started to talk. So she could speak, and somehow she said the Ave Maria with me, and then I said Pater Noster, and she remembered that prayer too. And I was so deeply moved, because I thought, oh my gosh, Jesus really wanted me to be here to encounter you and pray with you. Maybe you haven't been able to pray in your language for so many years. How many years? And I was moved because I thought, well, I fulfilled my task. So to sum up, I'd like to share with you something else. Oh, sorry, there is a little connection issue. My colleagues were sending me messages every day as if they were doing the same things I did. And I remember the message of a colleague who said, I'm about to finish my shift and I have a free hour. I'm going to go to the supermarket. Do you need anything? And that struck me because, I mean, my colleagues know that I have plenty of friends. I'm not alone, but I mean, my friends found a way to make me feel close to them, and that really struck me because the North American culture is so, I mean, selfish and individualistic. And I remember an extract by Don Giussani, and it was telling about monks in the Middle Ages, and he said in the past there were the monasteries and civilization used to have a rebirth there, renaissance, thanks to the monks. And the walls were also a means of protection to protect from enemies. Now, those walls do not exist any longer. Now, instead, we have a company, the company among ourselves. And so that company relies on our friendship that needs to share the attractiveness of God, of the Son, of Christ, and of His presence. Thank you.
Grazie, Cristina.
Thank you, Cristina. Thank you so much, because you really showed us that beauty and hope are always possible. So thank you again.
Elvira, presenta.
Elvira, you can introduce our next guest. Yes. So I'll introduce the next speaker. Well, we know that apart from the pandemic, healthcare workers and their families know what desperation and suffering are when there are serious illness situation, in particular at the end of one's life. So that moment can be a moment of extreme solitude and isolation, because either your relatives are not there with you, or because you're losing your sense, the meaning of life, or you lose your dignity. And the physical isolation due to COVID can make this situation even worse. So this is the question. What can medical care worker do in this case? There is a unity between medical caregivers and patients, which is we within the eye. So we asked Professor Patrick Vinay to talk about this partnership, this relationship between medical caregivers and their patients with reference to terminal patients. And I'm really honored to introduce Professor Patrick Vinay, Professor Emeritus of Medicine at the University of Montreal. He had a long career as a researcher and a nephrologist, and he's a professor at the University of Montreal. He was since 1995 to 2003, and he then decided very bravely and courageously to start studying palliative care and devoted the last 10 years of his professional career to the work with terminal patients. So he became the head of the palliative care ward in Montreal, and he has created a Center for Palliative Care in Quebec. And he spoke in over 40 conferences. He published over 60 articles, books, and he also created the guidelines for the right chest choice among possible different palliative cares and the use of methadone. And he also published the different books that talk among other things, about the families of terminal patients, and he has received the award Reconnaissance to 2015 by the Palliative Care Association of Quebec. And I now give the floor to Professor Vinay. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hello to everyone. Good afternoon to you, and thank you for this kind invitation. I will start going a bit further on what we just heard from Mrs. Benetti. Oh. I'm sorry, my computer just stopped. I'm coming back.